Have you done a podcast before?
I'm a big fan of this technology podcast,
Do you visit Mumbai often?
maybe once or twice a month.
And you wouldn't like to come to often as well, I would
I'm,
believe.
I grew up in Pune and
Yeah.
I've been there. Uh,
Oh, you're
and
a proper Punekar, is
well,
it?
originally my family is from the south, but I grew up in Pune most of my life. I'm actually a second generation employee at Cummins. My dad also used to work
Are
for
you
Cummins
serious?
for 35 years.
That's so cool. Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the Climate Clock podcast. I'm Sonal Bhutra, and this is a fresh new edition, and it is going to be a very interesting one. Because we often talk about air pollution, we talk about how these things are impacting us, the emission norms, and a lot more. But it sounds a lot technical, right? There are CPCB norms, there is a lot that industry keeps talking about as well. But what does it exactly mean? And what is India doing to fight this menace of air pollution? What is the technology that is being used? And a lot more. I have a very special guest with us on the podcast today, Mr. Ashwath Ram, who is the managing director of Cummins Group in India. Mr. Ram, such a pleasure to have you with us in the studio today. And as we were discussing about it earlier, climate, the term gets very technical. And the conversation that we've had, I'm sure we are going to have a blast today.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me. It's quite exciting.
But I spoke about the emission norms. There's CPCB 4 plus. There's so much terminology that floats around. Can you simplify for the viewers? What are these emission norms and what does government do with it coming with changes every other year? And what is the present one right now that we should be focusing on?
Sure. So usually in all these vehicles as well as in generating sets, you have an engine, and it's an internal combustion engine. So it burns either petrol or gasoline or diesel or even compressed natural gas. And when you burn these uh, fossil fuels in the engine, you have some output, and the output is carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. There are hydrocarbons. There is something called NOx, which is nitrous oxides, and there is particulate matter or soot. And these are some of these, as we all know, are greenhouse gases. Some of them are harmful to human beings as we breathe in soot and NOx. And what emissions regulation tries to do is it tries to balance whatever is the cutting edge technology to say what can you do to make the output out of a engine to be as less harmful or as low as possible. So, to give you an example, between CPCB2 and CPCB4 plus, CPCB2 was launched in 2014, and CPCB4 plus is just launched between 2023 and 24. There is a 90% reduction in particulate matter. There's an equivalent reduction in NOx and also in hydrocarbons. So it's a significant improvement. We joke within our industry that the output of some of our engines is probably cleaner than the raw air in some of the cities that we live in. So it's a serious problem, and we are trying to use technology to solve it.
I'm quite amazed by that figure 90% lower between two emission norms itself. So let's talk about the latest one, and then, of course, we'll have a conversation about other things as well. The CPCB 4 Plus, the norm, when was it implemented? Is it in force already? And where does Cummins come into the picture there?
Sure. So CPCB 4 Plus, the regulation was officially launched last year in June, and the government has given industry 1 year to fully execute it, which means the regulation is already in place, but it is voluntary. That means if you want to buy a genset with CPCB 4 Plus, you can, and it is enforced in certain cities like in the Delhi NCR region, in some parts of southern India, it's already being enforced. And in those areas, we are seeing a lot of sales already. But in the rest of the country, the government has given 1 year for all the manufacturers to get up to speed with the new products and then launch them. So we have been ready. We were the first out of the gate. We had been preparing for this for many years because we work in multiple markets around the world. So This technology was not really new to us. And so we've been preparing for many years, and we have been ready. We have been very successful. What the CPCB 4 does is that the emission norms are so tight that you can't use conventional, what they call mechanical engines anymore. So till CPCB 2 plus, everybody could use mechanical engines, and with mechanical engines, you could meet the regulation. Now you can't meet it anymore. You have to have electronic engines, and you have to have something called after treatment. So, because you're trying to reduce the level of pollutants to such a small degree, you literally have a chemical factory at the end of the engine which monitors the output in a real time basis. And then it uses all kinds of exotic materials like vanadium and platinum and a whole bunch of things, and it treats the pollutants, and it neutralizes them and reduces the output coming out into the atmosphere. So it's a lot of technology, lot of investments, lot of work by thousands of engineers, but the output is great for society as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. And hope that keeps working that way. And you use some big words, the components which are used there. What would it mean for a buyer in that case? It would be a bigger industry. Of course, it's not retailers. Are they ready to get it because the costs would be higher?
Costs are higher. Costs are pretty significantly higher, 20 to 40% higher as compared to previous technology. What we have tried to do, though, is mitigate that a little bit by, or to a major extent. One is by improving the fuel economy of the product, and second is by providing significant more features of durability and capability within the product. So fuel economy has improved significantly, and because of that, if people are using the gensets for longer hours, as we have seen in some applications, then those people will recover that money pretty quickly. For others, it's a little bit of a toss up, but the better technology, better features, and at the back of your head, you feel, finally, all the you're doing it for the overall society. A little bit you're taking a hit. It's like a little bit of a tax on yourself for making the whole environment a little bit better. So that's the way we are looking at it. Uh, I think it's mandated for enforcement by July 2024, which means after July 2024, we will not be able to sell any of the old technology sets. So then it becomes a forceful adoption, as is the case in all emission transitions, whether in the automotive side or in the power generation side. Typically, that's the way the regulations work around the world.
Okay, and we'll have to see how it works in India because a different note to it when the FGDs or flue gas desulfurization components, these were to be fitted in thermal power plants. The deadline kept getting extended, so let's hope that doesn't happen in this case.
Yeah, I'm a little optimistic and positive. If you look at the last two or three emission cycles within the countries, like let's say the transition first to CPCB, first to BS4, and then from there to BS6, that happened in India at a faster rate than almost anywhere else in the world. They didn't have to do it. They, if industry was asking for more time, people were asking for more time, but India has made a commitment at the in Japan at the Paris Accord. Even in the last few years, we have made a commitment that by 2070 we will be completely carbon neutral as a country. So if we don't do the work now, we will not be able to catch up in the future. So I believe the legislators are serious. I don't. There may be few delays because of sometimes it takes technology a little while to catch up, but I think the regulators' intent is serious, at least this time.
Okay, so regulations are very important when it comes. And do you think at an individual level it'll be difficult for anybody to go ahead and make that change and it'll be only enforced by regulations? Is that emission norm regulation very important in that case?
Uh, it is because unless it is enforced, if you can get something which is 20% cheaper, which doesn't really do anything significantly for you as an individual, other than it's good for society. Sometimes individuals make those choices, but I feel that these kinds of differences in prices usually happen in all industries, and usually financing takes care of it. So individuals also don't feel the impact at one time, they feel it over a period of time, so they kind of adjust to it and it becomes a new normal. So I think uh, it sometimes during some of these transitions there's a dip in demand, and then after about a year or so it then goes back to normal. But in the case in India, I think we won't see any dip. As a matter of fact, we are seeing demand even when the regulation is not being fully enforced.
Okay, there's already demand that we are seeing a big one.
Yeah, we have already sold over 5,000 CPCB4 gensets in India in the last 2 quarters.
Okay, and how big do you think the demand would be if we have to cater to the entire
Oh,
market?
the entire market in India is a pretty large market. It's over 100,000 gensets are sold in a year, even more. I mean, if you count the really small gensets. But the industry has got enough capacity to meet all the demand.
Okay,
So
and
that's
that
not a
would be a
worry.
big capex from the industries. Well, you said you have the technology already, but other players are also
See,
come.
the capex, even if you have the technology, it has to be adapted to a particular market and market conditions. So it's pretty significant, and you have to do it across the platform because this regulation is valid from the smallest gensets all the way up to 1000 kVA gensets. And so in our case, we have 14 platforms of engines to be converted to new technology. So it still requires significant investment in R&D. Still requires significant amount of engineers working, testing, validating, getting all the algorithms working. The regulation has very specific algorithms for ensuring that there is no deterioration over a period of time and those kinds of things. So you need to validate all those things. You need to run hours in the field. You need to get it certified. So all of that requires a lot of investment.
Okay, and yes, anything that comes with a lot of regulatory action, the process becomes longer. And you said, as you said, the costs also come along with it. Are there any particular states which have to get it, and are there any states which are getting away from it? They are not so keen. Like, have you seen the state participation in
No,
India?
everyone usually participates because it's driven by the Central Pollution Control Board. So it's nationwide. But the folks who are more aggressive at launching these are have been in the National Capital Region and also in the big cities in Bombay and in Chennai, Calcutta, Bangalore, where larger industries are present, and those folks don't mind spending. Like data centers for us is a very big market segment, and those folks don't mind spending a little bit extra to have the right appropriate technology for their application. So we have seen many people start to move ahead of the regulation just because this is what is right from a long term perspective.
That's very interesting. What next? You said that Gensets is a thing that is seeing a lot of change, but there's so much more that's happening in Cummins. What's the clean energy transition bit that we were talking about earlier?
So Cummins has been looking at climate change from a long term perspective, and Cummins clearly realizes that it is an existential crisis. And for 100 years of its life, and Cummins is now like a 103-year-old company. For 100 years of its life, the core technology has been diesel and natural gas. Even today, I would say greater than 85% of or 90% of our revenue comes from those industries. But we see a future where eventually we'll be going to a zero carbon kind of world, and we have been preparing for that. We see this happening in three phases between now and 2030, where existing technologies are being enhanced to use low carbon fuels, to enhance existing fuels, and also to make use existing fuels for multiple applications and still reduce the carbon footprint.
Okay.
Then you have the next decade between 2030 and 2040, where multiple technologies will be competing. We've been investing in multiple technologies, whether it be hydrogen internal combustion engines, whether it be fuel cells, whether it be battery electric vehicles, whether it be hybrid. So all of those technologies are slowly gaining momentum. But 2030 to 2040 is when there will be very significant competition. Infrastructure has started to get created, but it takes decades for good infrastructure to be created. So that is the decade which we are calling the messy middle, where no one technology is going to win. The existing diesel and natural gas and other technologies will also continue to commingle and exist with all of this technology. And then you have the period between 2030 and 2040, when some of the newer technologies will start to gain scale. You need momentum, you need scale, you need to be able to get the costs at the right place, you need to get efficiency, safety, all of those kinds of things all happening with some of these products. So that's the way we are envisioning the future moving. It's very difficult to predict. We thought things would move a little bit faster, but actually in the last couple of years we've been seeing that decisions to move faster into some of the zero emission technology has actually been pushed out in our applications, just because they're so complicated. And people use our products. They are working people's products, which means they use the engines or products that we produce to earn their livelihood. So they move materials, they mine for goods, they use it in very very heavy duty kind of applications. And so it's not for recreational use. The recreational markets, which are driven by the classes, those actually have moved faster on some of these technologies. But the industries where Cummins plays, they are also moving, but at a slightly staggered pace.
It's also because, as you said, the nature of the industry is such, it's complicated, so the change takes little longer. And what I also took away from this particular answer that you gave is the messy middle. That's very interesting, because there'll be so many technologies. But you also mentioned that with the usage of the technology or newer technology, with the same fuel, you can reduce emissions. So are we here to say that maybe fossil fuels will be there for longer than what people were imagining?
Uh, Even European countries, which were the most aggressive at moving forward because of these geopolitical crises in Ukraine, with the Red Sea, with Israel, so many of these things happening, the move away from fossil fuels has actually slowed down quite a bit. And the other thing countries have realized is, yes, everyone wants to move forward, but no one wants to be the first to just put all their money and on technologies which are still maturing. So we think they will move forward, but at a slightly slower pace than what people envisioned maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But it's very difficult to predict. You always get breakthroughs in technology by which, sometimes it slows down and then suddenly it starts to accelerate. But we are preparing for all of those situations. We continue to invest very heavily. We have a whole bunch of engineers working in India, in China, in America, in Europe, to try to figure out how to stay ahead, how to do the cutting edge research to stay ahead of the technology.
Okay. So, you also mentioned that, of course, we have seen so much. COVID happened that changed the way things happen. We spoke about greenflation, that also became a term, that maybe sustainable products are causing a lot of inflation. When we talk about coming back to emission norms, because it just clicked me in this conversation that while we're talking about companies being ready, or maybe, there being enough technology or capex, implementation still becomes a problem. How is implementation in India vis-a-vis some of these developed countries, for example, China?
China has been very, very aggressive, and they have been aggressive because as a government they are able to take a decision and then it gets enforced. There isn't, anybody to oppose decisions made centrally. So they have funded this through subsidies. They have funded it through infrastructure, and they have wanted to be seen as the leading country in the world for some of those technologies. So if you look at the whole battery electric vehicles, or you look at even hydrogen, I would say China is ahead of everybody. They are even further ahead than countries like the United States. And yeah, so they are mandating by force execution of tighter and tighter standards. But India has not been very far behind. As a matter of fact, we are our emissions in India are on line with China right now.
Yeah.
And with CPCB 4 plus, the genset market, we are ahead of the world as far as emissions are concerned. So something we don't talk about much, but something we can feel a little bit proud about, that at least in some areas related to emissions and environment, we are ahead of other countries.
Oh, that's amazing. And considering the population as well, right? That is a feat because while we talk about overall emissions being higher, but per capita it comes out to be
Yeah,
lower
yeah,
for that very
yeah.
reason. You're the chairperson of Sustainable Mobility Group as well, that focuses on reducing air pollution in metros. Gensets or emission norms is one way. What are the other ways which the industry is looking at to ensure that the pollution from automobiles or pollution from industry in general comes down? Technology is one, of course. So, what are those newer technologies that maybe you can tell us about?
Sure. So, 74% of the pollution or the air pollution in our cities is caused by mobility applications, not by static applications. So, it's your cars, your three wheelers, your two wheelers, buses, trucks, uh, all of those. And this is true around the world, not just unique to India. And certainly, the tightening of emissions by the government has led to a lot of improvements there. So, a lot of technology has gotten introduced in those areas. These are what we call closed loop technologies, by which the the engines in the vehicles are able to monitor themselves and are able to uh, ensure that the tighter emissions are being met. So that is one aspect of it. By regulation, what is output by the engine is made tighter and tighter and tighter and cleaner and cleaner. The other part of it is to clean the fuel itself. So if you look at BS6 fuel as compared to BS4 fuel, and even earlier, the particulate matter, which is the sulfites in the diesel itself, have also dropped by 60 or 70 or 80% from the previous regime.
Okay.
So the fuel itself is cleaner, so its ability to pollute is also lower. Now, around the world, multiple countries have multiple solutions. So, in India, we are using compressed natural gas, we are trying to use ethanol, we are trying to use biofuels, and all of these products, these engines are capable of running all of those fuels. So, when the fuel is made available, so for example, if you can get more ethanol and you start blending more and more ethanol into the diesel, even if you do 10% blending, that means 10% is green fuel versus a non green fuel. And as you can increase the ratio of those, there are now synthetic fuels being developed which are low carbon kind of fuels. As you can keep doing that, again, you reduce the footprint or you improve the green quotient of what is being emitted. The second part is education. If things like, if people don't know, how to manage emissions, that it's important that older technologies, like in our country, still we have BS1 vehicles also running, which are 15 plus years old. We have BS2, 3, 4, 5, and now 6. So till the old population keeps running, and that pollutes at, like you said, if we have reduced it by 90%, so imagine how much how much
Much is
those
that.
vehicles are polluting, and those continue to exist in the market. So introduction of things like scrappage policy, introduction of those kinds of norms, also the greening of society. So the requirement by government to plant more trees, to educate people, to say that, okay, if you're just saying 10 minutes away from the office, don't take out your car and come to the office. Why don't you walk, or why don't you use bicycles? Or then working with the municipal corporations. Like just recently, we signed an MOU between CII and Pune Municipal Corporation to say that we will jointly work on reducing Pune's air pollution levels. And we will do that by designating certain zones in the city as green zones, where we'll say, if you don't have to travel more than 10 or 15 minutes, then you should just go by bicycle, or go using public transportation or shared transportation, etc. So combination of many of these activities, education, plus everyone in society doing their part, plus the industry doing its part in regulating and controlling what it's outputting, and then mechanisms by which you trap the pollutants through planting trees, by doing many of these, by having green offsets, by doing all of those kinds of things. The combination of all of those activities, I think, can lead to a sustainable future, but it requires a lot of work. It's easy to for me to talk over here. When you actually go to do it, it's pretty difficult to do. It requires the cooperation of many people.
No, I absolutely agree because when since we're having this show, it is about raising the awareness around climate conversations. But when you talk to an individual, as long as it's not impacting them directly, it's very difficult to change the mindset as well in that case. And people don't even know a lot about their cars, so to change the idea about how you can reduce emissions plays a big role there as well. So just generally to understand what will be the future in that case of sustainable fuels when it comes to hydrogen, because there's such a big push here, green hydrogen from gray to green, but we don't really have capacities as yet. Do you think this could be the future fuel here?
Um, we certainly believe that, which is why Cummins has invested in one of the largest hydrogen production companies in the world. We did that 6 or 7 years ago, and it's a company called Hydrogenics, which Cummins acquired. And so we have our own cutting edge technology to produce electrolyzers, which then make hydrogen. Uh, in India, one of the largest installations of green hydrogen is being done by GAIL, and that's a Cummins application. So we certainly believe there's a future for it. But what is the reality right now is that it's taking longer than people anticipated. There are still a lot of concerns about the cost of the technology. Right now, if you look at the cost of hydrogen per kg, it's anywhere from 4.5 to $6 per kg, and the holy grail is to get it at $1 or $1.50. So we still have quite a way to go over there. The technology is being evolved, the scale is being evolved, the costs are being understood. But if anyone has a good chance to do it, it's probably going to be India, because we are blessed with sunshine 365 days of the year, and you can use that energy to build solar farms, wind farms, and use that green energy to then uh, work an electrolyzer and then convert water into hydrogen.
And there's a lot of investment happening in electrolyzers as well. That is the way to start green
That's the way
hydrogen.
to start, but it's the investment needed by the world compared to the investment being made by the world is a fraction, which means uh, all the governments of the world committed to invest X amount of money in the next 10 years. Only 3% of that money has been spent so far, and we only have 6 years left. So unless governments are going to really open up their purses and spend a lot more money in the next 6 years, we are going to significantly miss the investment targets uh, for where we want to be. And in the meanwhile, the technology is being developed, it's being matured, it's the scales and capacities are being set up. But none of these companies make any money today. The only reason they are in existence is because of subsidies by governments. But that'll have to be provided, because the technology is so nascent and there are so many risks, and the investments are very very large. But countries like China are providing those subsidies. Countries like countries in Europe are also being provided a lot of subsidies. The United States, for example, has awarded one of the biggest subsidies for the cost of hydrogen, which makes the cost of hydrogen in the United States probably one of the lowest in the world. The government, through PLI schemes, etc., has also put up a very positive start to this. The trick, though, is that is a long term game. It's not something which you announce a scheme and for 1 or 2 years you offer the subsidy and then everything. It takes decades for industries like this to be set up and to be successful. So it will require that momentum, long term sustainable momentum in investment, if we are to be successful with that.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said it correctly.
So we have to continue to believe in what the process is right now. It is slightly the next. Actually, I was going to ask you about the subsidies next. Do you think they should stay? But you did say that.
They need to for a while. I'll give you an example. Even in for buses, As of today, 100% of all the batteries that are used in the buses are imported,
Okay.
and they're imported mostly from China. So all the subsidies that have helped our industry to learn a lot have not really helped the Indian economy. They have more like helped some of the global economies. But slowly, people are making investments in India to set up batteries and make our own. But it's going to take time. So the subsidies can't really go away till the industry stands on its own feet. So absolutely, I'm a firm believer that these subsidies help the industry to stay afloat. And once they are strong, then of course they can be taken away because they no longer need them.
And they need to reach a steady state for
Yeah,
that to
yeah,
happen.
yeah,
Can't just take
yeah,
it away like that.
yeah.
A slight different question from the climate conversation that we have, since you told me something very interesting. Your father was also the CEO at Cummins. You took that forward. What is it that you are doing differently from your father? Did he give you any lesson on how to run a company?
He came from a very humble kind of background, and his father in turn had a paralytic stroke when he was very very young, and so he didn't get an opportunity to go to university and study, etc. So he started off in a completely different path by working in factories, and he came up the really really hard way. So for him, some of the things about you know getting the best ideas, reading a lot, taking good ideas, and then implementing them. Those were the kinds of things that made him very, very successful. And of course, working, 24 by 7, 365 days of the year. So we never got to see much of him when we were growing up. But I did get to, when I was a little kid, I used to go to factories, walk around with him, and see things. That's probably what motivated me to want to be in this industry to build things. Learned a lot about culture, learned a lot about hard work, learned a lot about how to set a vision, how to execute and get things done. So yeah, very very proud of the fact. He would have been very proud that I've followed in the same company, even though not everyone in our family thinks so. They think we can't do anything else, so we keep working for Cummins. But that's a different story.
I belong to a family of chartered accountants, so I understand what you're saying. Everyone's like, you just do that, but Mr. Ram, it was such a pleasure speaking with you today, understanding the nitty gritties of the business, and all the more because you were so honest about things that are happening in general and de-jargonizing a lot of these typical and complicated terms for us. So, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lovely to talk to you, and yeah, I had a great time. Thank you.
Okay, all right. With that, we'll take your leave on this edition of Climate Clock Podcast. But do keep writing to us on topics you want to understand, you want us to discuss, and you want us to know more about. Thank you so much for joining in. We'll come back with more updates.